Okay. Okay. Here we are. Okay, Rabbi Isai. Today we're going to do the Kabbalah of Dairy. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me? Okay, double check. Okay. So we're going to do the Kabbalah of Dairy because we all know that Shavuos is coming up, not this weekend, but next weekend, Saturday night, Sunday and Monday. It's 2 days Shavuot. In Israel, it's 1 day, but in the diasporas, we know 2 days. And in Shavuos, we know there's a big spiel about eating dairy products. And we could speak a little bit more to that later. But first, we're going to talk about the Kabbalah of Dairy and meat. It's part of our class about Kabbalah of Food. Every food has a mystical side to it. And we know that the Torah speaks a lot about dairy. There's a famous line of the Torah that you shall not cook the kid in its mother's milk. Lo tevashel gedi b'chalei v'imo. Now, kid over here is talking about a little goat, not a little kid. I mean, chas v'shalom, a kid. We also want to mention, speaking about kids, tragedy in Texas. And we want to remember those children that were mercilessly, ruthlessly murdered in cold blood in Texas. And our thoughts are with their families, with people, all the other people of the school, and such things should never, ever have to happen. It's a very, very chaotic world that we're living in. But I was just I went off to kids because I was talking about, it says you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Kid over there refers to a little goat, a little shepsela. Yiddish, a goat is not shepsela. A goat is a little tzigala in Yiddish. So you're not supposed to cook the kid in its mother's milk. Now, one knows that is the basis of all the laws of kashrut. It comes from that law of not to cook the kid in its mother's milk. So from there, we see clearly that you can't cook milk and meat together. Now, if you look at the original place of the Torah where it talks about not to cook the kid in his mother's milk, it's speaking more about humane stuff. It says that you shall not slaughter a child and its mother or its father on the same day. A parent and a child should not be shechted, one in front of the other. Torah says if you're already eating meat, you have to do it in an ethical way. So there are many things in the Torah about the ethics of eating meat. So one thing is that if you do already eat meat, you have to salt it. So we don't eat the blood, because eating the blood is considered very grotesque. And so we were not supposed to eat the blood. We're not supposed to eat, we're not supposed to slaughter the child and the parent on the same day. And another halacha, which seems to be part of this ethical way of eating meat, is not to cook the meat in the milk. Now, why is that considered unethical? The simple explanation is because the milk represents the mother. The mother fed the child the milk, right? That's how the child was nourished, and how the child grew up. Was the mother was for many months. The mother gives the child the milk. So then to go ahead and to cook the kid in its mother's milk, that's considered an unethical thing. But although the origins of it seems to be a matter of ethics, at the end of the day, it became a halacha, became like a law, a Jewish law, that you're not allowed to mix milk and meat altogether. And in the Gemara and the Talmud, it speaks about, because it says it 3 times in the Torah. It says you shall not cook the kid in its mother's milk 3 times. So we say 1 time is to tell us that you're not allowed to cook it together. Second time, why is there written a second time to teach us we're not allowed to eat it together? And the third time is to teach us that you're not allowed to derive any benefit. Remember last week, or 2 weeks ago, we spoke a lot about the oral tradition, and that there is a oral tradition of the Jewish people. And like most of the laws that we have today are based on that oral tradition. So when Moses said to the people, you shall on Sukkot take a new fruit, what's the new fruit, the beautiful fruit? Etrog. That came from the oral tradition, right? We spoke at length. The tefillin, when it says you shall place it as a sign on your arm and as a symbol between your eyes, what are we talking about? We're talking about tefillin. The Torah says you shall slaughter the animal like I commanded you. That's what we know the laws of shechita, of how a shochet is supposed to slaughter. There was an oral tradition that came together. And the same thing is in the laws of kosher. How do we know? Where do we know the laws of kosher? Where do we know you're not allowed to eat meat and milk together? It only says you shall not cook them together in the Torah. And even that, it only says it regarding a kid in its mother's milk. It doesn't speak about all sorts of animals, milk and meat. But we know that from the oral tradition, that when it says a kid in its mother's milk, it's not just a goat, it means a cow, and it means a sheep, and it means, right? And when it says in its mother's milk, it's not just the mother, its mother. It could be any milk. And when it speaks about the animal, it could be any animal, right? So then it goes on. The oral tradition tells us, why does it say 3 times? One time to tell us not to eat it, another time to tell us not to derive any benefit, and another time to tell us not to cook it together. What does it mean? Not to eat, we understand what eating is. That's pretty clear. What does it mean not to derive any benefit? You're not allowed to derive any benefit from a mixture of milk and meat. So for instance, I'll give you an example. Let's say cat food. Many times cat food could have some milk and meat together in the cat food. So you think that it's okay. It's the cat that's eating the milk and the meat. The cat doesn't need to be kosher. But if you are deriving benefit from it, from a mixture of milk and meat, you can't, right? So a cheeseburger, right? So like if a cheeseburger, obviously you're not allowed to eat a cheeseburger because it's milk and meat. But what about, working in a McDonald's, making money on selling cheeseburgers? That's deriving benefit from a mixture of milk and meat. So we have 3 things that are forbidden: cooking, the milk and the meat together. So if you're working in the McDonald's, you break all 3. You're cooking it together. You're cooking if you're flipping the burgers and you're putting the cheese on it, that's cooking the milk and the meat together. And then when someone eats it, milk and meat, and then if you sell it, that's deriving benefit. So all those different things are forbidden from the oral tradition as we know it, and that's where. So now we're going to speak a little bit about to the Kabbalah of it, right? That's what we want to speak about. It's a Kabbalah class. So we want to know what is sort of the mystical meaning of it. It's quite interesting that when Abraham, the first Jew, it says that he was on the 3rd day after his circumcision, he was sitting out in front of his tent, and he was looking for guests because he wanted to do a mitzvah and bring in guests. And it was a very, very hot day. Hashem made it. It says a hot day, so he shouldn't be bothered with bringing guests. But then from a distance, he saw there were three indigenous people from that area wearing these robes over their head. And we are taught that these 3 guests that came to Abraham, they were angels. But anyways, you give a look over there. It says, what did Abraham give them to eat? It says he made milk, cheese, and he made tongue. Tongue is meat. So it's interesting that Abraham gave to the angels, he gave them a mixture of milk and meat. Which is how you can look at it in the Torah. It's quite ironic, We know that milk and meat you're not supposed to eat together. Why would he feed it? Remember, feeding it, that's your deriving benefit from it, and giving it to other people to eat if he felt it was wrong. Right? So we could say maybe perhaps that was before the Torah was given, because Abraham was before Moses, so the Torah wasn't yet given. So maybe it was permissive at those times, but it doesn't make any sense. If they were angels, why would they? Right? So some say that he gave them, we know that you're not supposed to eat milk and meat together, but you're allowed to eat one after the other. Not in one shot, but one after the other, you're allowed to eat milk and meat. So after you eat meat, the halacha says you have to wait 6 hours. Some people wait a little less, whatever, but most people wait, most Ashkenazic Jews, we wait 6 hours after we eat meat. But if you eat the milk first, then you wait maybe half an hour. Some people wait an hour tops. So you can serve the milk in a meal, right? And wait a little bit, and then afterwards you can eat meat. So it's possible that's what Abraham did. He gave them first to eat first he gave them to drink the milk and the cheese, and then he waited a little bit. The Zohar, it says you have to wait an hour, but some people even are accustomed, after milk, you just rinse your mouth, and then you could eat meat right away. But after meat, you have to wait 6 hours. Okay. But let's talk a little bit about the Kabbalistic notion of milk and meat. Why don't we mix milk and meat? So we spoke a little bit before to the fact that there's a commandment in the Torah, one of the 10 commandments: honor your father and mother. And the commandment to honor your father and mother comes right after the commandment of keep the Sabbath holy, which comes after the commandment of honoring God, prohibition against idolatry, and belief in God. So what's the connection? The 10 commandments, we're coming up to Shavuot, right? We read the 10 commandments. What's the connection of belief in God, prohibition against idolatry, not say God's name in vain, and then the Sabbath, and then honor your father and mother? And the other question everyone asks is, why is the commandment of honor your father and mother in the group? There were 2 tablets, right? So we say, why were the 2 tablets God brought down? One tablet is for mitzvahs between man and God, and the second tablet was mitzvahs between man and man. So second tablet has it not to murder, not to steal, not to commit adultery, not to bear false testimony, not to covet. Those are the commandments which are interpersonal, between man and man, between people. So that's why there's 2 tablets. But the question is asked, why is the commandment of honor your father and mother in the first tablet? You would think that belongs in the second tablet. Now, some people will say then the tablets will be on 6 in one and 4 in the other. It would be a little crooked, right? If you put too many commandments on the second tablet. But why would they put honor your father and mother first steps? Here comes a very important idea. Is that honoring a father and mother, why do we honor a father and mother? Where does that come from? Maybe the parents should honor the kids. Why is it? So we're saying, basically, whatever is creator has to be sanctified. Wherever you come from, you have to be indebted, you have to give thanksgiving. So if your parents created you, together with God, obviously, so the respect for parents is like the respect of God. So that's why it's a mitzvah between man and God, because people that don't respect their parents won't respect God. Because really one thing is tied with the other. The mitzvah of honoring your father and mother is tied with the mitzvah of belief in God. So why do we honor our father and mother? Because they brought us into this world. So we recognize that if something comes before us, if something brings us here, if something brought us to where we are now, we must respect them and honor them. So respecting a father or mother is really like respecting God and honoring God, believing in God. Right? It's like the famous story, the rabbi was on a plane and together with a scientist, and they were sitting together, and both of them had their son with them, right? They're both children. And the scientist couldn't help but noticing that the rabbi's son was constantly giving his father his slippers and helping him out on the plane and taking him and taking him there. And he said his son wasn't doing much. So he turned to the rabbi, he says, Rabbi, how do you do this? How do you get so much respect from your son? And I can't seem to get my son to do anything for me. Like, well, how do you manage to do that? So the rabbi said, oh, the thing is like this. He says, you're a scientist. So you teach your child evolution. So you teach your child that you go back a generation, another generation. Ultimately, you go back to the monkeys, to the apes. So every generation backwards is one generation closer to the monkey. So your son, he feels that he's more cultured than you are because he's one generation farther away from the monkeys. And every generation going forward is more progressive and greater. So why should the greater generation show respect for the older generation, closer to the monkeys? The rabbi said, but we believe that we come from God. So every generation earlier is one generation closer to God. So that's why my kids give me so much respect, because they realize my connection. I am his link to God. So here we got it. Honoring your father or mother is tied in with our respect for God. So why do we honor our parents? Yeah. It's like also like the story of the okay, I'll skip this story. I'll come back to it later. But here we go, and we're talking about so to me, what's milk, what's meat? Milk, we say, do not cook the kid in its mother's milk. What is milk? Milk represents source of life, the life that the parent gives to the child. And meat represents the creation. Milk is the sustainer, is the source of life, which is like God, which is like the creator of heaven and earth. And the meat represents the kid, which represents the results of that, right? That which is created, creation. And so there always needs to be a separation of respect between creator and creation. It's like for parents. A lot of people today don't know what true respect for parents is. And the Torah speaks about what does it mean to respect the parent? In the olden days, it used to be like you wouldn't sit down in the seat that your parent was sitting in. You used to sit in. The olden days, the parents had a seat to sit in. You're not allowed to sit in the seat. You're not allowed to interrupt when they speak. You're not allowed to argue with them. You're not allowed to there are many things which the Torah speaks about what is respect. Why? Because parent is like creator. And that's what the milk represents. That's why the Torah says, do not mix the milk with the kids with the meat. Because there has to be for there to be a healthy world, we need to know that creator is creator. Previous generation to previous generation. We need to show respect for that which comes before us, which is part of our respect for God. And so the tradition of not mixing milk and meat is because you don't mix the creator and the creation. Creator is represented by dairy. And that might also be a reason why on Shavuot we eat a lot of dairy, because that's the time we speak about the Torah, which was given to us from Mount Sinai. It's a time that we speak about the creator, and that's why we eat a lot of dairy. Dairy is representative of that. So here we go. So the Kabbalistic explanation, why we don't mix milk and meat. Cooking, eating, deriving benefit. Why? Because we don't mix creator and creation. Then there is another explanation, which is in the Kabbalah, and that is that milk is the color of milk is white. And the act of giving milk is also an act of chesed. Color white is representative of kindness. And whereas meat, which is red, is blood, it represents gevurah, which is severity. So kindness and severity, we don't mix. It's two separate things, separate sfirot. You can't mix up the two. There's a time for discipline, which is severity, and there's a time for kindness. A lot of parents, they mix up the two and they get all confused. Right? When they should be being kind, they should be kind to their children. They get all strict, become severe. It's time to be kind, not to be strict, right? And there's other times that one has to discipline a child. And some parents say, "Oh, you got to be nice, to be friends with our kids. You can't," and so they mix it up with the. So, and then there are times for blending too. But generally speaking, there has to be a separation between chesed and gevura. They're two of the spiritual sfirot, and that's why we can eat milk. Meat after we eat milk, and not vice versa. You can't eat dairy after you eat meat. Why is that? Because there's a rule in halacha that which is lower overcomes that which is higher. So when you drink a cup of milk, so milk is, we say, is kindness. So whatever is lower is govar, it overcomes. So when you eat meat afterwards, right, that's not a problem, because then the kindness overcomes the severity. But when it's the other way around, when you have the severity first, you have the meat first, then when you put in the kindness gets diluted with the meat that's in the system. So it's also part of the same idea of not mixing the milk and the meat, not mixing the kindness and the severity. So that's why I wanted to tell you, that's why it's customary on Shavuot. It's customary to eat dairy and blintzes, and cheesecake, all kinds of dairy products, because dairy is representative of kindness, and the second thing is that on Shavuot we think about the Creator. Remember, we said that dairy represents the Creator, the giver of milk, the nurturer, and so we also that. And there's another reason that's given, is that when they gave the Torah at Mount Sinai, on the day they gave the Torah, there were a lot of laws regarding meat, how to slaughter it, some people didn't know how to do it. They came to Moses. So Moses says, until we know exactly how to take care of preparing meat according to Jewish law, if you drink milk, you're safe. So it says that they all turned to drink milk right at the very beginning, until they knew how to prepare meat according to the halacha. And that's why on Shavuot we always eat dairy. Anyways, Rabbi say, I have somebody coming to my house because I had, there was a terrible storm the other day, and in my backyard we have a tree. It was chopped down by the winds. There was terrible winds last Shabbos, and I have a tree in the backyard that was split in half. It's very, very traumatic to see a tree broken in the back of your house. And the fact my kids, they planted the tree 20 years ago. It's a massive tree, but it just came toppling down. So I have a guy coming over now for the insurance to come look at the tree. Well, I have to think about what's the spiritual meaning of it. I'll let you figure it out. Meanwhile, I have to meet this guy. So I'm going to end the class just a few minutes early, if you don't mind. And if anyone has any questions, you can ask any questions about the spiritual aspects of meat and milk, and not mixed meat, milk. Anyone?
Yes. Chicken has no milk.
Correct. The initial prohibition of not eating milk and meat was only really for animals. no, that have milk. It was not for chicken. So from Torah law, actually, chicken parmesan is permitted. But rabbinical law, there was rabbinical law that they said that since people treat chicken like meat, people call it meat, and so the rabbis prohibited chicken with milk as well. That's a rabbinical law, and we still keep rabbinical law because of not mixing up one with the other. But the original law was only for animals that have milk. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, hard to know what meat is that when you chopped it up, and
What's that?
when you're cooking, it's and the cooking environment, it's hard to separate this meat, that meat.
Correct. You just know the law is mixed milk and meat. The question is why didn't they pull the same law on fish? Right, which the fish people know is different. And it's not even though they call it a meaty fish or something, right? But it's not. That's not right.
Okay.
But
Thank
it applies also to chicken. Chicken also. Yeah. So there's no chicken parmesan. Sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbos.
Shabbos, Eddie. Yeah. Anyone?
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom. Take care.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Shabbat shalom.